Intel is down almost 20% in after hours due to the earnings report for Q2, and we can see that the stock is trading at a level that essentially it was doing already in the 2013 and 2015 kind of time frame. So if you've been investing in Intel stock over the past decade, you haven't made any money other than the dividend. A dividend that they actually pointed out today on the earnings that they will cut from the Q4 timing. So everything looks bad. I think a large drop of this, 20% is also because they cut off dividend. But despite all of this, and despite someone like me that has been, very, very negative about Intel over the past, let's say 8 years, and kind of changing a little bit of my tune over the last, let's say 12 months, I think there's still some stuff that points to the fact that this company has a brighter future than most people think. There are definitely a lot of challenges still remaining, but I do believe they are making the right choices right now, the management, Pat Gelsinger, and I think there's this kind of choices they are making now. Also today they mentioned they will cut the workforce by 15%. That's going to represent around 20,000 people losing their jobs. A lot of people suggest that that's also just the beginning. It could be a lot more than that in the coming 12-month period. So looking at the financials quickly before we look into the actual details, you can see that earnings came in at $12.8 billion US, and this was in the low end of the guidance. The guidance that they gave in Q1 was 12.5 to 13.5, and they came in at 12.8. So in the guidance, but below that. But the bigger miss is the EPS. So the EPS was 10 cents. They came in at zero, essentially at 2 cents. So a huge miss there. We can see that computer and client group is doing their biggest segment still. Data center and AI not doing that great, especially losing all the margins. You would say that kind of segment, Sierra Forest should be more competitive with AMD's products. I wouldn't say they are leading. They are leading in some aspects, but not on average. But they are doing much better than they did last let's say 2 or 3 years ago. In addition to that, Granite Rapids, let's wait and see. We know that it's gonna be based on Intel 3 project, Intel 3 process, which is fairly competitive. I think Intel 3 is, if you do some research, I think most people agree that it's better than the average TSMC 4nm process, but I would say it's a bit less good than TSMC's 3nm. But again, a lot of AMD's servers out there and AMD's product with our Intel's main threat, a lot of those kind of products are on TSMC's 4nm. So with Intel 3, I think Intel is definitely within striking distance in terms of manufacturing capacity and capability. The question stands, when AMD starts to move on to TSMC 3nm, and how well will Intel continue to add on this kind of regaining of the momentum a little bit. Let's wait and see. In addition to that, the data center and AI segment is, as you can see, it's the AI segment that, the AI part of that is gaining momentum for NVIDIA, for AMD, and for Broadcom. Those companies has made a lot of sales in that segment. That had led to the traditional servers, the CPUs, the Sierra Forest for Intel, so the Xenon lineup for Intel, and the EPYC lineup for AMD, has kind of, been facing a little bit of kind of the unwanted child right now, because everyone is spending tens of billions on data center in terms of AI GPUs, so not in the CPUs. But that's gonna change, I think, as a Sierra Forest, Granite Rapids from Intel, and also the successors to those kind of products. If we go on my list here, what do we have for 2025? We can see that for 2025, Intel should have, on the server side at least, they should have Diamond Rapids on Intel 3, Clearwater Forest on Intel 18A. So that's gonna definitely, be much more competitive than, let's say, if you go back to 2022 and look at the products that were been selling there, Ice Lake and Milan from AMD. A lot of those, big servers that are, in use from Google, Microsoft, Apple, or whatever that is, Amazon, they haven't kind of updated, so we are facing a generationally updated potential in 2025. So I do think that Intel's data center and AI segment is gonna be very good for next year, but also for AMD. So it's a win probably for both of the companies. It's been under pressure, especially due to the AI GPU. but that's gonna be sold next year. I do believe that. For client computing, I definitely think, you know, Lunar Lake, I genuinely believe Lunar Lake is gonna be the best product that Intel has kind of delivered over the past decade. Lunar Lake is gonna be launched on September the 3rd. It's gonna be more efficient. It's gonna probably be very competitive in AI tops performance. Gonna be very competitive in terms of graphics performance, and most importantly, I think it's gonna be very competitive in battery life. It's also gonna have Lunar Lake is going to have a memory on package, the same kind of way that, you know, Apple, when you buy an Apple M3 MacBook, you cannot pick your RAM, so you have to essentially decide if you want to have 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes of memory as you purchase the laptop. After you've done that, there's no way that you can change the amount of memory after on, because it's built into the packaging with the CPU and the GPU part. And that's gonna be a little, you know, add a bit of capital expenditure to Intel, because traditionally all these laptop CPUs, they don't have, you know, the memory on package. So the memories is added at a later stage. For example, Lenovo that makes the laptop, they will add the memory from SK Hynix or Corsair or whatever that is. So that's, you know, not up to Intel. But starting with Lunar Lake, for some of the laptop CPUs, it's gonna be a kind of change of strategy, and that's gonna require Intel to purchase a lot of memory on, you know, before they sell. So that's gonna, you know, be a bit more capital expensive, but in the long term, the additional, you know, the good thing about that is that you're gonna gain a lot of, you know, power saving and battery efficiency. So that's gonna be really good for the client computing group. Although we just saw, you know, last week that AMD also launched the new Strix Point, which will be very competitive. So again, I think, you know, going into next year, I think both these client computing group and data center AI is gonna do well for Intel. Additionally, they don't talk about, you know, Gaudi 3. Any sales for Intel in Gaudi 3 in data center GPUs, like NVIDIA's H100 or AMD's MI300, is gonna be just a positive. I do think, you know, within a year, they're gonna be moving into the at least single digit billions, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 billions for 2025. So that's gonna, you know, give them some margins and some nice additional revenue. So yeah, I think, you know, we are definitely very close to the bottoming out for Intel's data center segment. And the client computing group, I do think it's gonna hold up fairly well, with the additional note of, you know, their desktop DIY segment, the 13900K and 14900K, so Raptor Lake CPUs. They're having, you know, a lot of technical issues, facing maybe a potential, you know, class action lawsuit, because there's a lot of faulty products out there. So yeah, that's one to looking into. But again, in the long term, I think, you know, the story for Intel is this Intel Foundry. They say here that, you know, don't look at the numbers. Numbers are awful, but they have enough money to survive at least, you know, 3-4 years in the future. So, you know, the capital is there for Intel. I know that, again, the stock is, you know, taking an absolute beating right now, minus 19%. But Intel Foundry business, you know, depends on ASML. ASML's high-end EUV, so second generation EUV, seems to be firstly go into Intel rather than TSMC. Why is that important? It's important because with these kind of machines, this enables, you know, you to manufacture the more and more finer details and the more difficult nodes. So if we go back to this kind of my list on nodes, as you can see in 2014, just before we entering the first EUV nodes, you know, which started in 2018 and 19 from TSMC, Intel was, you know, very competitive in 2014. They were, you know, the market leader. But as they kind of neglected the effect of EUV, TSMC started to step by step regain, you know, or not regain, to gain essentially the leadership. Intel was stuck on 14 and 10 nanometer variants for a long time, well into 2021 and 2022. They rebranded the 10 nanometer process ESF to Intel 7, which still is, you know, been selling in terms of Intel Raptor Lake and Raptor Lake refresh, so 13th and 14th gen desktop CPUs that you'll see in your gaming computers. And that, you know, there was also some issues with that. As I said, technically it's been a huge scandal over the past 3-4 weeks that, yeah, those kind of CPUs are faulty and they break down way too early. So it's gonna be, you know, potentially a class action lawsuit coming in there for Intel, a big problem. But yeah, so that was, you know, the reason that Intel fell off, and as their manufacturing capability fell off, you know, they started to fall off also in their designs and against AMD. Remember, AMD is not manufacturing anything. They're essentially riding on TSMC's capability to some degree, or to a big degree. But anyways, as I mentioned, you know, why is ASML important? Well, Intel kind of neglected the first gen EUV machines, but in the second gen they seem to have a, you know, first kind of go at it ahead of TSMC. TSMC now starts, you know, complain a bit to ASML about the price of the second gen EUV machines. But if you want to stay competitive, you know, going forwards from 2024 and 5 and onwards, you definitely need those second gen EUV machines. As I highlighted on the, you know, dark green one, you can probably start to enable that machine for Intel 14A, maybe Intel 18A to some degree, some few layers. But I think, you know, this is essentially what's helping Intel. As they, you know, with Intel 4, I would say is their first EUV node, with Meteor Lake launched late last year for the laptop CPUs, laptop market. Lunar Lake, again the second gen. Lunar Lake is actually gonna use TSMC 3 nanometer, some equivalent of that 3P or 3B, I don't know. Also, Arrow Lake is gonna be shared between Intel 20A and TSMC 3 and B, I think. TSMC and 3. But anyway, so the important point here is that, you know, Intel from 2024 and onwards is much closer. Intel 4 nanometer and 3 nanometer are, I would say, better than TSMC's 4 nanometer, but worse than in TSMC's best variants of 3 nanometer, which would be like N3B, I think, or N3E, I don't remember. But yeah, so they are still, you know, competitive. And remember that their main competition, AMD, is not necessarily using N3 all the time. N3 and, you know, N2 for next year is gonna be usually for Apple. Apple has the first go at those higher, you know, most advanced node for TSMC for an entire year usually. Then, you know, the likes of AMD and Nvidia get access to the most advanced node. But Intel get access to their most advanced node immediately as they're, you know, doing their own stuff. So I think there's a competitive advantage for Intel there. But, you know, look at this, you know, they introduced Intel 4, 3, 20A and 18A within, you know, a couple of years. And we've seen that. We've seen that in their talking about 5 nodes in 4 years all the time. And they still talk about that. Here in the first slide, they say, you know, 5 nodes, 4 years, nearing completion. And Intel 18A PDKs are released to customers that are going to be using Intel 18A. So not only for Intel's own computer laptops, CPUs, but also for outside customers. They mentioned on the call that they have around 15 billion in essentially orders for their fabs from outside customers. Could be AMD, could be Nvidia, could be essentially anyone. But they didn't give any naming, and I think the problem is that, you know, customers that are trying Intel's 18A and in the future 14A are scared to mention that they're gonna to some part outsource their manufacturing from TSMC to Intel. So that's why there's a lot of, you know, a bit of hush hush about that, and there's no, you know, naming out there right now. But at some point we'll see the naming. And the pipeline is much bigger than 15 billion that Pat said on the call just moments ago. So the 15 billion number that Pat mentions for their Intel Foundry business from outside customers is essentially finalized contracts. So it's not a, you know, a loose number, you know, that there's potential. I would say that's essentially 15 billion of pure revenue coming in. The pipeline should be much bigger, as also Pat kind of hinted at. The pipeline could be, you know, at least 4 or 5 times bigger, close to 60 to 70 billion. And this is, you know, the early days of Intel Fab outsourcing to customers. So yeah, the 5 nodes, 4 years, kind of looked bizarre in the beginning. Everyone was laughing at it, including me. I was like, these guys are bonkers. It's just marketing talk, but it actually looks like being a thing. And again, Intel 20A may be very competitive with TSMC 3 nanometer, maybe not quite there with TSMC's 2nm. But here's the thing, Intel 18A I think is going to be very competitive with TSMC. It's going to be the first gate all-around process out there. It's a special new manufacturing process, essentially a added kind of development evolution of the FinFET technology we've been seeing over the past 8 to 10 years. So the ribbon FET, as some like Intel calls it, or I think gate all around that Samsung or TSMC calls it, and also backside power delivery, another fine technical advancement that Intel made. We're gonna see those in Intel 18A, and I think that's gonna be enough for them to be to in 2025 and 2026 kind of really go head to head with TSMC on their own products, and then onwards in 2027 maybe a lot of customers will kind of change from TSMC to Intel. So in my opinion, when looking at for example on the consumer side, so we talk a lot about the nodes. Let's look at the consumer side. What kind of products should we see? So in 2024, we know that Arrow Lake is they mentioned on the call, be launching in Q4 this year. I think it's gonna be competitive with AMD Zen 5 to some degree. I would say Zen 5 in general would be better in most use cases. Maybe not in absolute performance, but in terms of price and it's a small efficient product. Arrow Lake I think still gonna be somewhat bigger die, and but it's gonna be very competitive. Lunar Lake I think is gonna beat the best AMD chips that we've seen now launched a couple of days ago. So Strix Point on AMD's AI 300 or 370 HX products that you've seen on the last couple of days. You saw the reviews from Linus Tech Tips and all the Dave 2D and the others. I think Lunar Lake is gonna beat that in terms of efficiency at the bare minimum. So that's going to be a good win. They mentioned 80 new Lunar Lake laptops for the holiday season. Hence why I think that they're gonna have a nice Q4. I think maybe not perfect one, but I think Q4 is gonna stop the bleeding to some degree, and the client computing group is gonna kind of rebound some margin. The problem that they mentioned on the call was that some of the as Meteor Lake ramped up. In the beginning, they had issues with the kind of cost structure of Meteor Lake. Now the Meteor Lake margins are getting very nice, but now they are ramping Lunar Lake much faster than expected. Things are going very well, but that's gonna be a lot of heavy investments. As I mentioned, Lunar Lake is the first x86 APU that has memory on the system. They need to buy that from someone, SK Hynix or whatever that is. Corsair or whatever that is, and that's gonna be on the package, and it's gonna cost a bit more than a traditional laptop APU, and that's gonna be a lot of cost intensive. It's gonna be seen in the margins, but in the long term I think it's gonna enable customers to kind of regain some trust for Intel. So Lunar Lake is gonna be really good. Next year we're gonna have Panther Lake on Intel 18A, gonna be very competitive with AMD again. And 18A is gonna be more in-house project rather than Lunar Lake's gonna be outsourced to TSMC. So I think 2025 is I would say that Intel will increase revenue in 2025. I would say 60 to 75, maybe 80% chance that 2025 will be better profits. Also, I mentioned they're gonna cut number of people working there by 20,000 people. So the workforce is gonna be cut down. It's gonna save a lot of money, maybe a couple of billions. So it's quite a bit per quarter. And I think finally, going back to the stock price again, I'm not, discussing about this that you shouldn't put all your life investments in Intel. All I'm just saying that I do believe that looking back, like let's say if you had if you could go ahead in time and 5 years from now look at these kind of numbers, I think these kind of levels from $40 to 20, and even if we go below, let's say closer to $12 per share price, is gonna be very good buying opportunity, as long as the Intel Foundry business kind of executes. And I do believe that right now, as things look right now, the Foundry business looks to be on the right path, and this is why I do believe in Intel a little bit more now. Again, this is not investment advice, it's just me sharing my ideas. I know there's not I've been against Intel over the past 8 years for a reason, so I'm not a fool here. I'm not saying like everything is good when the stock is down 25-30% on a day, But I think, like, you know, there's more to it than just the numbers. You know, Wall Street just sees the actual numbers today. They have no clue about, you know, Intel IFS. They have no idea of how good Lunar Lake most likely will be, how good Panther Lake will be on the consumer, and also how, if you look at the reviews on Intel's Sierra Forest server, Xenon 6 generation, they look very good. Maybe not better than AMD, but they are better than AMD in some parts. So they look good. And I think the successor, the Clearwater Forest, is going to be maybe better than AMD's, whatever they have next year, 25. So yeah, I think, you know, in addition, remember I mentioned that the data center segment, not the AI part, you know, not the NVIDIA data center stuff like H200 AI, blah, 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 blah. I'm talking about the general purpose one. I do think that by 2025, a lot of companies will purchase more on the traditional server CPU rather than GPU. They will invest a lot in GPU, but more in CPUs compared to 2024 and 2023. So that's gonna, you know, help both AMD and Intel to alleviate a little bit of pressure. So yeah, with that, I think, you know, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe, share your ideas. I'm up for any, you know, ideas that you have in the comment, and yeah, see you in the next one.